Yeah, my name is Joe Doyle. I'm an economist, and I'm at the Sloan School of Management here. I'm also on the board of JPAL in the health sector. A lot of my research is in child welfare as well, so effects of foster care on kids, adoption policy, child abuse and neglect, prevention. But a lot of my research, especially my RCTs, are in healthcare. Just to give a little background, I have a few in the field right now. So one is a patient-level randomization where people who are addicted to opioids when they come in the hospital. For big hospitals around here, about 20% of patients who come into the hospital by some measures are already addicted to opioids, and then they take longer in the hospital because it's hard to manage their pain medications. They leave, they come back looking for more pain medication very quickly, so they're very expensive, sort of frequent flyers of EDs and hospitals. And separately, I'm interested as an economist about whether specialists are worth it or not. So they spend, if you bring a specialist onto a case, it costs more. And the question is, are the outcomes better to compensate for that higher cost? So I'm generally interested in that. And so combining the opioid epidemic, hot topic, something I'm interested in helping people, and then my interest, academic interest in does specialization matter, I've teamed up with anesthesiologists to randomize patients, these opioid tolerant patients, into a treatment arm where the specialist will be assigned to their case on day one, and the control group will get usual care, which typically is about 20% of those patients get a specialist consult while they're in care. And then after they're discharged, the treatment group will have access to those specialists to manage their pain medications and work with their primary care physician to coordinate how they're going to manage this problem that these guys are already on too high of opioids. And I really think that's going to short circuit this revolving door back to the ED looking for more pain medication and hopefully make these guys' lives better and save costs at the same time. We'll see how all that works. But I feel like that is a question I'm truly interested in, and I found partners where it'll be a multi-site trial. In California, we have UC San Diego, UCLA, Cedars-Sinai, UC Irvine, and then we have Duke and potentially Vanderbilt and MGH on the trial. So we have 40 people in the trial right now, so it's just getting started. But we had to think about how do you randomize and how do you actually go about doing it. I have a number of other ones that I find to be interesting. One is Dr. Jeff Brenner. He was written up in the New Yorker a few years ago about hot spotting. He figures out who the most expensive patients are. 5% of patients account for half of all Medicare spending, and 20% of patients account for 80% of spending. So if you could figure out how to treat these guys in a more economical way, then you could save a lot of money. Like, all the money's there, so why not target them? And so his program, he won Dr. Jeff Brenner won a MacArthur Foundation Genius Award. And usually when you're given a Genius Award, you think, oh yeah, I'm a genius. Thank you for finally noticing. But he wants to know whether his program actually works, so that's great. He's partnered with MIT, colleagues of mine here at MIT, and I are randomizing again at the patient level. Some will get into the program, some won't, and then we're going to track their outcomes over time. I'll just mention briefly two more, and then I want to hear more from you guys about what you're doing as we go along. But another one is at a physician level. So one of the big topics today is what level do you want to randomize at? So one's at a physician level. We're going to randomize. Physicians will see best practice alerts when they order scans. So if they order a CT scan for a headache, that combination of a diagnosis and a scan order and the patient's characteristics go off to a web services company. It gets matched to the American College of Radiology guidelines, and a score gets generated from 1 to 9. And then we can tinker with then we'll come back to the physician. You might get an image that says great job, or you might get an image only when it goes against the guidelines. We can randomize whether it gets defaulted to cancel that order. So if just one click would cancel the order versus put in some hurdles to doing the wrong, quote unquote, wrong thing, and then make it easy to do the right thing. And then of course by looking at patient outcomes, you can actually see whether these guidelines or greater adherence to the guidelines actually improves outcomes or not, which would be interesting. So that's at the physician level, and we'll talk about why. And then last time, working with the Veterans Administration, their main goal in life at the moment is to reduce suicides. That's a big problem that they're facing. So how do they go about doing it? Well, with big data, all the rage, we're big into predictive analytics these days. So there's a tool that, based on the characteristics of the veteran, tries to predict the risk that the person might attempt suicide. And based on that tool, which is very predictive and kind of scarily predictive, we're going to randomize treatment so that they're going to get what have been found in the past to work. So these are caring messages like texts or emails, phone calls from people saying that we care about them and we're worried about them. Those have been shown to work in the past, but how do you go about it? Does it work in this population? It's kind of an interesting question. So it's kind of hard to do it at a patient level. So they have something like, they have a few $1 million to do this. So there are 140 clinics that they could do it in, and they're going to roll it out to 25 of them in the first year. And so why not do it in a random way in order to rigorously test whether it works or not? So that's like clinic level randomization. So we have patient level, physician level, and clinic level. And so we can get different answers to different questions as the methods go on. So how to randomize? I thought that was kind of funny when I was asked, how do you randomize? How would you randomize? If you wanted to test whether, what do you want to test? If you want to test whether this executive education improves the world, makes your, gets you promoted, let's say. So we're going to have a lot of people who signed up for this program. How would you go about randomizing them? How do you randomize? How would you randomize?
I guess I would assign each one a number and then go on randomizer.org.
Randomizer.org?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
I have an hour and a half and we're done, right? How to randomize? Just some website and it comes up with some random number. It might be actually interesting to think from a physics standpoint, like how do you get random numbers? And like people talk about cosmic noise, or I don't know where they're getting these random numbers from. I kind of just take the random numbers. I'm hoping the computer scientists have figured that out. Flipping coins doesn't sound that interesting for an hour and a half, so I'm trying to caution. I'm not going to only talk about exactly that you're going to flip coins. We're going to talk about some more interesting things than that. So we'll talk first about what is randomization, just make sure everyone's on the same page. You'd be surprised by people getting sort of confused by that. Then we'll talk about simple randomization, what's the unit of randomization, which I just described briefly, methods for different evaluation questions, and then real-world challenges and design solutions. So the norm in economics at a seminar is that you get constantly interrupted, so I'm completely happy to do that. So if you have any questions as we go along, I'm used to just having more of a dialogue than a monologue. So. All right, so what is randomization? So if you think about a city, this is a city in India where JPAL has done microfinance experiments. And then you could break it up into different segments. These are 400 segments. One idea is that, so if the population, what is the mean income for these population? It's 1,250 rupees. And so if you took a random sample of people, and truly at random, then we can use statistics and law of large numbers and things to figure out that we're going to get an estimate from the sample, 1252, that's supposed to be representative of 1250. So 1250 is the truth, what the actual average population income is. A random sample will get you, the mean of the random sample is going to get you something close to that. It's not going to nail it, but typically we would say that these are not statistically different from each other. So we're going to be able to say with 95% confidence that it's between, within some confidence interval, let's say 1240 to 1260. And a true random sample, the middle point is going to be very close to the actual population. Okay, so that's when you had a random sample. This is slightly different. We're going to talk about random assignment. So the red dots here are treatment groups. So these are neighborhoods, basically. And we're going to randomly assign these treatment groups to be read. You went to the website and figured out which ones would be the right ones. So now the treatment group is going to have a mean, and their average income is around 1257. And then the remaining guys would be in our control group, those who are not getting the microfinance opportunities. And if we looked at their data, if you look at their data, then their income is going to be quite close as well to the overall population. And that's how we check whether the randomization worked, as we get characteristics of the population that we're randomizing, the sample that we're randomizing, some to treatment, some control. And then table 1 of every paper is, let's look at the characteristics, the baseline characteristics of these treatment and control groups and show that they're similar. We flipped the coin properly. And this website did it properly. I think it's hilarious that they asked me to do how to randomize, because my first ever randomized controlled trial, we had software in the tablets that we were interviewing people at bedside in the hospital. Asked them if they want to be part of the study, consent them. It's completely voluntary. Nothing's going to be, we're not going to treat you any worse if you say no. No worries if you don't say no. But if you'd like to be part of a study, please do so. And they read a consent form. They sign it. Now they're consented. Then we have a baseline survey. what's your education level, are you employed, things like that aren't in normal administrative data. And then we say, okay, well, we'll be right back. We're going to see if you're in the treatment or control, like whether you're in the program or not. They click a button, and it randomizes them treatment or control, and then they let them know. Well, this software that did the baseline survey and was on a tablet, you would think that they would have cosmic noise or something that they could randomize people, and it turned out that that machine was not working. So our pilot, like the first 10 people, it wasn't like it was all treatment or all control. It was like 7 were treatment and 3 were control. And we're like, well, that could happen. And then like 20 people later, it's like 17 treatment and 3 control or something weird like that. And we're like, this can't happen. And so then we had to redo the whole thing. It was like a nightmare. Like the only thing we could really mess up in an RCT is not flipping the coin properly. And we found the one software that didn't. So it's very important from my personal experience that you should be monitoring very closely whether the randomization is working. You should get close to 50-50 as time goes on. You should also make sure that the people who are in the treatment group are getting the treatment and the people in the control are not. So that should also be, like table 2 is the what happened to the treatment group versus the control group. And it should be like 100% of the treatment got something and the control group didn't, and what other things. So in my opioid tolerant example, where I'm randomizing specialists to see them, the treatment group 100% will get treated on day 1. The control group will be usual care. That's an interesting number. It's something like 20%. So when we see outcomes later, we're going to want to keep in mind, well, the control group did get some treatment, and probably the most needy ones did. And we're just getting these extra guys. Actually, Rachel's going to talk exactly how you would analyze that kind of trial tomorrow. All right, so any questions about random assignment? Okay. So I guess I have to read this off here. If we took a random sample from the south of the city, the bottom of the screen before, this one. So there's the south of the city, the north of the city. If we took a random sample from the south of the city and one from the north of the city, an expectation the difference in income should be statistically insignificant. What do you think? A is true, B is false, C don't know, D it depends. Okay, everybody in? Okay, so that's interesting. So some people said, don't know, I won't yell at you. How about D, it depends? I like every economics question, usually answer is it depends. Who said it depends? Am I like, okay, so why do you think it depends?
It could be that folks who have more income live in one space over the other, but it could also be that there is no actual difference and income is randomly distributed through both north and south.
Yeah, so it's possible that if the city is very homogeneous, that if you broke it up into 2 sides, then you're not going to be able to tell the difference between income. But I like the sort of hint of skepticism there that that's a strong assumption that the city's is really similar. So it turns out that this is it's not random assignment, and the question answer to the question is it could be possible that the income would be statistically the same, but we still worry that there might be some differences between the north and the south in terms of access to different types of how far it is to travel to work, or all kinds of things could be slightly different between these 2 things, even if the income comes off as okay. And there are lots of places where they say, oh yeah, we're doing an experiment. Some of our clinics are going to get this thing, and some of them aren't going to get this thing. That's not an experiment if you chose which ones get it and which ones don't. Because the concern is that the ones that you choose to get it may do better on their outcomes in the future, not because of the treatment, but because you chose them and they were just naturally inclined to do better in any event. I think especially if people are if they like their program, they might subconsciously even pick the guys that they think are going to improve a lot to be part of their study. Or when I'm working with Mass General Hospital, and we're piloting changes in how we pay physicians there. And they even were using words like pilot. It sounds kind of like an experiment, but they didn't randomly chose the primary care practices. They picked the most high-functioning ones to work with us because they thought that we would learn a lot from them and they would be good partners for us and so on. But if we find later on that they're doing better on their initiatives to save on costs, it could definitely not be because I'm talking to them weekly. It could be because they are high-functioning primary care clinics that were chosen deliberately, and that they're naturally going to do better with the initiatives they're rolling out to improve their cost structure. So, but you'll hear people say, yeah, I'm doing an experiment someplace, and they think what they're saying is that there's a comparison group. They have two groups and there's a comparison, but it's not a randomized comparison. So, well, hopefully you could check in the data and see that they're different. But sometimes, like you were saying, it doesn't need to be different. These things could click off as okay, but we'd still worry that there were some unobserved things that aren't in our data that could still be different. Whereas if you truly randomize, not only do you get that these observable things like that you measure would be similar, but that the unobservable stuff would also be similar, which is like typically a very strong assumption in any kind of regression that you run, but in a randomized trial, it's plausible that it's true. Okay, so let's think about simple randomization. So one idea is to fix the probability of whether it'll be treatment or control. So typically 50-50 would maximize your power. And so when I have patients coming into the hospital who are opioid tolerant, or they're super utilizers and they're eligible for the program, we're setting that parameter to be 50-50 of whether they get into the program or not. So that's called spot randomization, sometimes you'll hear, or point of service randomization. And so whether it's the software, or in one study we have pre-selected the study ID is assigned to a treatment or control group, and that's sealed. Nobody the person who did that is not part of the study. They're a researcher. And then after the person consents and they're in the study, then they can open up that envelope that's tied to that ID. That adds a level of monitoring, however, because we do worry that someone who let's say the enroller thinks this person would really benefit from having a specialist. They open up the envelope, it's heads or treatment. They could grab a different one and open it up until they get the right one, right? That's a concern, that it's been pre-selected as opposed to flipping the coin right there in an objective way. So what we need to do in terms of monitoring is that the patient, before anybody goes to them, is assigned a study ID. And that study ID has already been assigned a number that's nobody knows, but there is a computer that knows it, but the people running it don't know it. So that the researchers later can check, okay, study ID 5 was supposed to be in treatment, study ID 5 was in treatment. And we can monitor that weekly and make sure that there's no funny business going on with who's being assigned treatment and control. But if people are really tough about it, they don't like to having these envelopes. But sometimes, for logistical purposes, we kind of have to do something like that, and then just make clear to everyone that it's important to have high fidelity to the experiment, and then trust but verify is the classic. So we're going to say we trust you, but if any mistakes happen, we want to make sure, and we're going to be monitoring it. You can do it on a daily basis, especially in the beginning. Make sure that it's adhering to what you did before. In this kind of model, you could end up with more heads than tails. So that here we had 6 treatment and 4 controls. With a large enough sample, it's really not a problem. But if you had relatively small samples, I wasn't going to go into this too deeply today, but there are ways that you could do randomization in groups. So the first 20, you could guarantee to have 10 treatment and 10 control, and making sure that it's random the order in which that they get into the treatment and control group. Okay, the other way to do it is to have a fixed proportion. So let's say you had a set of clinics, 140 clinics, and you want to make sure that half of them are in the study and half aren't, or in my case 25, because we only have funding for 25 clinics. 25 will be in, the rest will not. And so in the development context, so first you need that sample frame. You need to know who are you going to be assigning to treatment and control. So my clinic example is easy. That's every VA clinic in the country. And then you're going to determine the number in the treatment and the number in the control. In the development context, I often go to seminars and they'll show when the lottery occurs, they'll put the people's names in a basket, and they're only going to pick out 20 names out of the 100 people, and that would be, or 50 if it was 50-50. So there it's very clear. You had a 1 in 2 chance to get it. It's public. It's transparent. People like it. Or you could just use your computer and go to the website and figure it out. So that's slightly different. One is on a rolling basis, you're randomizing people in. And the other one is you have this nice list. So when you do the rolling basis, I'll talk a little bit later about, sometimes you want to make sure that not only are you randomizing everyone, but you want to make sure that of the men in your group, let's say it's 50-50, and of the women it's 50-50. Like you really want that to be well balanced in your treatment and control groups. Well then, in this example, you could have 2 buckets, one for men and one for women, and grab them out. So if you know the sampling frame ahead of time, you can sort of plan exactly how you want that randomization to occur. If you're doing it on a spot basis, then it's harder to do that kind of thing where you're making sure that you're on a 50-50 basis along a number of dimensions. So you have more control when you know exactly who you're randomizing and then you're randomizing as opposed to getting a flow of clients in and randomizing them at that time. Okay, so this is an important one, the unit of randomization. I'm going to describe the considerations, but then I want you guys to be thinking in your own context, kind of experiments that you'd want to do. If there were any issues with, well, what unit should we go with, we could have a discussion about that. So that's a warning. If I'm not going to cold call on anyone today, but I'd like to have some dialogue going on after we go through this one. So one idea is to randomize at the individual level. I came up with this example of schools and pupils. And so we're going to think about randomizing some of these kids are going to get the treatment, some are going to be in the control group. The other way that you could do things are with clusters. So these are classrooms now, and you could think about randomizing, well, one classroom is going to get the treatment, and one treatment's going to get, one classroom is going to get the control, and just randomize at the classroom level. So now you know all the classrooms, you're going to be flipping coins at the classroom level. And then if these were schools, so some are bigger schools and some are smaller schools, you could be randomizing at the school level. All right. Why would you want to randomize at, let's say, the school level versus the individual level? What's a situation where you'd like the school is the natural thing to do? Why would we ever care about the level of randomization? There are trade-offs.
Either way, administratively complex, it's just impossible to sort of have half of the school do something and the other half not. Or if there's a high risk of contamination where the commingling of the intervention and control groups would essentially give some of the benefit from the intervention over to the control. So there's sort of learning from the control group, from the intervention group, just based on the fact that they're co-located.
Yeah, if you think the treatment itself is going to impact sort of everyone in the classroom, so let's say you were going to train in the school level, let's say you're going to train principals how to do a better job. And then, so they go through all that training, and then you see whether whether the kids do better. It's going to be hard to randomize that at an individual kid basis, right? You expect that the principal is going to be treating everyone the same, and they're going to run a better school, and maybe that'll impact people. If you were going to train teachers, then you could do it potentially at the classroom level. Some classrooms, teachers will be treated, some won't. But once a teacher is treated, you expect all the pupils to benefit from it. And then I liked what you were saying about the spillovers. If you teach one set of kids how to do something, and then they go ahead and teach the other kids how to do it, then at the end of the day, you will learn something. You'll learn that the treatment and control group, there's no difference. It doesn't mean that the program was not effective. It was like super effective. You only had to train like 2 people how to do it, and they taught everybody else how to do it. And then your treatment effect will be 0, even though it's like the most effective program of all time. All right, so that's where all these issues come up. So I like to think about, well, what is the effect that we expect to have? In this, another study I'm doing is, with the clinical decision support study I described, where the physicians they're entering their indication, a headache, they're entering in their scan order, a CT of the head, and then that information goes off and they come back and it says, well, you're not supposed to be doing that. We think physicians might learn over time that they're not supposed to be doing that. So we don't want to do a patient-level randomization where sometimes the doctor is going to see this support, sometimes they're not. Imagine if they don't know who's in treatment and control, then if they don't get any information back, they might think, well, this is fine. I'm not getting yelled at by the computer, but it might not have been fine. Or maybe they learned before and now they're not ordering the scan for what would have been in the control group. So we would find no effects. We expect the treatment to be at the physician level when we're showing physicians information. And so we can't randomize at the patient level. We have to randomize at the physician level. Okay, and then you might worry, well, what if some physicians learn you're not supposed to do CT scan for headache, and they tell their other doctors in their clinic? That could be a problem. And that could dampen the effects that we're finding. And that's one of the caveats to our study, is that We expect that doctors order scans relatively independently in this context. So we don't expect them to be teaching each other how to order scans. But in other contexts, if you have residency programs, for example, where you have an attending physician, a senior resident, and an intern all working as part of a team, then those teams are making team-based decisions and they're using information as a team. It would be really hard to randomize at the physician level if that were the dominant mode of how the scans got ordered. Because sometimes the team would be composed of two treatment and one control. And, they would be learning over time and there would be all kinds of contamination. So there you'd want to randomize at the team level if that were possible. But as some of you know, if you're in healthcare, these teams get reconstituted all the time, and so it's really hard to do that. All right, so here's another quiz for you. An education department wants to see if increasing the duration of recess can help reduce rates of obesity. What is the appropriate unit of randomization? The child level, household level, classroom level, school, village, and don't know. All right, so it looks like D's the big winner, the school level. Some people said classroom level, some people said at the child level. So who said child level? It's okay. Yeah, okay, why would you do it at the child level?
Just because those are the ones that have more time to run around and not be in the class.
Okay, that's a good point. Like we're aiming it at kids, right? The kids get the recess. But at the child level here, what we mean is, let's say there's a class of 20 kids. 10 of the kids in the class are going to get an extra long recess, and the other 10 won't. My kids, like, all they care about is recess. All right, like, they would kill they would be so mad if like half their class got extra long recess and I don't. Like, that might have effects, big effects on on obesity. Yeah, because they're going to be out of stress. They'll be eating a lot of chips or something. I don't know. It's not going to be good. So, and that is just impractical to give recess longer to some kids and not to others. Some people said at the classroom level, so that would be like, let's say there were 4 second grades and 2 second grades got to have longer recess and 2 didn't. I think that news would also spread pretty quickly. It's definitely a 5th grade. It would. Maybe the 1st graders, you could get away with it. The school level does seem like it might make more sense. You could do it at the grade level, potentially, like school grade level, but yeah, I think you guys are right about the school level is probably the right way to go on that, just for political reasons. And but you were probably thinking as well, like the effect is aimed at a kid, like the kid level. So the kids are the ones who are running around. So on just that basis, the kid level might make sense, but from a practical standpoint, you're not going to be able to get away with that. Oh yeah, go ahead.
What about like the question of what we were talking about before about how some geographic areas in the city or different schools, you might have different demographics at those different schools based on the neighborhood. So how do you deal with that type of situation?
So the beauty of the randomization, whatever unit you're randomizing, you're flipping a coin. Half of the schools are going to be in treatment, half are going to be in control. Then you expect that the neighborhood distribution across the treatment group will be similar to the neighborhood distribution across the control. Okay. If you had a really small number of, like let's say you had 5 schools in your district, and you're randomizing them in, you're going to have 3 in treatment, 2 in control. You just have your sample size is too small in order to get you the balance. So it's another consideration on, we'd like to do at a school level, but they're with 3 schools. Well, you're really not going to, at that point, that design's probably it's just not going to work. And you have to think about a different intervention that you want to study at that point. It's really hard to randomize it all. Was that your concern? At a small n, you could have problems, yeah. Okay, and then the heart of this seminar is about these different methods for different evaluation questions and then real-world challenges and how we overcome them. But before that, does anyone have any questions on what do I mean by randomization or what do I mean by unit of randomization? Because we'll be talking about that continually. Okay. All right, here's another question for you. The Department of Agriculture believes that if farmers use more fertilizer, yields would improve. One advisor believes organic fertilizer will be more effective. A second believes inorganic would be better. That sounds interesting. And a third believes neither will be effective. Can we test all 3 beliefs with one single experiment? A, yes, B, no. you need 2 separate experiments, you need 3 separate experiments in C. Yes, but it's best to do 2 separate ones in D, and they don't know. Okay, yeah. The answer is, yeah, I don't know about the should part. The should always, as an economist, it depends, right? It depends on the cost and the benefit of doing it all at once, but especially with statistical power. But yeah, if you had, in this case, you would have 2 treatment arms, or 3. You could have 3 treatment arms, and a control arm. So with multiple treatments, you could have treatment 1, which is organic fertilizer. Treatment 2 is inorganic fertilizer, and the control would be the rest. And so here, you're going to be assigning, a third of your villages there to one, a third to the other, and a third to control. So why should you do it that way? There could be economies of scale. So you're going to be running a study. If you had to do 2 separate studies, then it would be there'd be higher fixed costs to doing that. Sometimes, though, you run out of this small n problem. If you have 50 things you could randomize, if you could only tell the difference statistically with your power and with 25 in one arm and 25 in another, then you're basically going to be stuck with one treatment. But if you have enough n, then you could start tracing out different types of treatment. All right, so how about reducing crime? So we're going to try to figure out how to lower crime. Advisor A suggests that crime is an economic phenomenon. So we're going to do some job training to get people jobs. Advisor B says that he wants to hire more police officers. And Advisor C says that she wants to do both. She wants to do some job training and do hiring more police. So Advisor A says job training, B says more police, C says combined strategy. So how many treatment arms should we use to test the hypotheses? All right, cool. So you guys are on board. We're going to have 3 treatment arms. One's going to just get one thing. One's going to just get one of the other thing. Just get the police officers, and then one group is going to get both. And the reason why I find this interesting is when I'm doing a first study of like a landmark, a flagship type of program, typically I'm not sure I'm going to find effects. And I want to basically get the biggest hammer I can and see if I get any effects. But at the end of the day, if it has no effects with everything we throw at the problem, then it's unlikely that the individual parts are going to do any better. But once we think that the full program works, then we want to unpack, well, what is it about that program? So you could randomize one component of it to some people, one component to another people. And the question is, do you need to have them all in conjunction to get the real outcome? There could be some basic examples like if I gave some people laptops with no software in it, or I gave other people software with no laptops, then they're not going to have any effects on their outcomes. But if you give people both, then they're obviously going to have effects. If I gave some people iPads and some people Surface tablets, they could have similar effects. If I gave them both, it's not going to double the effect. So the interaction of these things together, what the design where you give people a combination of treatments, as well as the individual treatments, you get to test whether there are extra kick, this interaction of having the things combined as opposed to just the sum of the parts. So the way I'm a health economist, I like to think about encouraging doctors to do the right thing. Sometimes people want to give social feedback. So this is called sometimes naming and shaming, or give awards to people, I should say, where we're going to recognize those that are doing the right thing. Another way that you could do it would be to pay people based on their outcomes or their performance. So we could have the performance-based pay would have we're going to measure how you're doing, and we're going to tell everybody how you're doing, and we're going to give bonuses for that, and then we're going to have this cash grant. So one group you're going to get both. One group you're only going to get one treatment but not the other. And then one group here we're reserving to be a treatment group. So we're going to have these different combinations of you're going to either have yes, yes, you're going to have both, you're going to have no, no, you're going to have neither, and then these off diagonal are you're going to have one but not the other. And then when we compare the outcomes, we can compare any of those categories and say, well, compared to the control group of getting nothing, does one do better, does the second do better, or do you have to have both? So in this example, we're going to have these recognition of people, and we're also going to have the cache, and the different colors are the different groups. So these guys are getting both, the yellow are getting both, the blue are just getting the recognition, and the green are getting the cache, and then the Ds are getting nothing. Sometimes it's called a factorial design, because you can imagine as you get 3 treatments, it's going to explode the number of the options that you could have. Typically, I see this in a 2x2 context. It's easier to implement. Okay. Another thing that we like to do is to vary the intensity of the treatment. Economists are all about measuring the sort of are these things linear, nonlinear. So in a drug trial, you want to think about the dosage. Do you just need to give a little bit of the drug, or do you have to give a lot of the drug, and how is that linear or nonlinear in terms of the outcomes? And other ways of saying that really are sensitivity or elasticity. And then spillovers could be different if you treat more people, let's say, than fewer. So we'll go through some examples like that. All right, so one of the famous, we have, at JPL we put out brief cases, and we put out reports about what we've learned about the world. And one of my favorite ones is about what do we learn about the effects of price on take-up of things. So here, sorry, it's hard to read. We have the black dots are deworming in Kenya, these medicine to deworm. We have bed nets in clinics. We have soap in India, water disinfectant in Zambia, water disinfectant in Kenya, and bed net vouchers in Kenya. And the x-axis here is the price that we're charging for the treatment, which are either medicine or bed nets. And the y-axis is take-up. And so if we have free, if we give away the stuff, the take-up, actual use of the bed nets, we get 80%, 60 to 90% of take-up if you're just giving people things. But as soon as you charge 10 cents for the thing, and even then you get these dramatically steep curves in terms of free is a very special number. People take up things when it's free. It didn't have to be that way too. People worry that if you give people things, they're not going to respect it, and so it's they're just not going to use it. They didn't have any skin in the game. They didn't pay anything for it. They might not use it. The best evidence that we have from the development context is that if you give people things for free that are actually valuable, like disinfecting water and bed nets that people recognize, that they do use it. And as soon as you start charging anything for it, you get this pretty big reduction down to like 20, 30% take up when it's a quarter, 25 cents to get the treatment. And these are based on randomized trials where we've randomized. Some people are offered it for free, some are offered it for 10 cents. And you see these dramatic differences in take up. So elasticity is just an economist's word for as you change the price by some percent, what percent is the quantity change? But basically, we're just interested in the relationship between, as you increase price, how does the take-up fall? Another one that's kind of interesting is in vaccines, like the herd immunity is kind of interesting, where let's say the yellow here, this is a pure control group. This group, the red is always the treatment, so we're going to treat 25% of people in a village. The other village is 50, other 75, and then we're going to treat everybody. And then you could try to see, I think it's measles, you basically have to vaccinate everybody to get rid of that thing, but like malaria, people say 50% of people could be vaccinated, and that would just stop it in its tracks. So this is a type of design that you could actually try to see, what fraction of people do we have to immunize in order for them not to have problems with that disease going forward. Another example would be job training. So if you gave people job training in all job markets, this is from a real trial where we had a pure comparison group, a pure control. We had the treatment. We have the treatment group. We gave them the job training, and then we have other people in their same area that did not get the job training. And this is all job markets, so this is competitive job markets where there aren't many jobs going on. In both the all markets and competitive job markets, the treatment group gets jobs at a 38% clip. But in the competitive job markets, the comparison group, the other people in the market, they fared worse in the competitive job market than in all of them, because there were only so many jobs to go around, and the guys who got job training snatched them up. And so yeah, the job training was effective for them, but you're actually hurting the comparison group in that case. They're not really the counterfactual of what would have happened without the treatment. It's more at the now it's more at the market level. You learn if you train some people, you're going to create winners and losers. All right, so now my favorite part is in terms of the challenges that everyone faces. Is anyone planning a trial and wants to describe what they're interested in, and we can talk a little about the methods? There'll be real-world challenges as well. We could launch into them if you want, but yeah, Henry, what are you working on?
Sure. So we're building a program. Everybody here has heard this already because I seem to be speaking up a lot. But we're launching a program that will kind of assign a household adult mentor / care manager / case manager / navigator. All these terms are pretty much synonymous these days. To help them assess barriers to economic mobility and employment outcomes for the head of household, and then work with them on goal setting and assess kind of some of those key areas in their life, where they are and where they want to be, and also connect them to a network of service providers in each of those kind of key areas of a person's life. So you have a housing specialist, transportation, list goes on. And one thing we've been talking about in our small group is, so there's going to be a group that will receive the adult mentor and this kind of this referral network of service providers. And then initially we've been thinking there would also be a group who would get just that referral network but no mentor, and then a control group would get neither. But based on maybe potential funding constraints, we've been thinking we might need to rethink how we structure it, maybe just do mentor and network versus pure control and nothing.
Okay, so yeah, you're going to look at different dosages essentially of the program, and you're trying now to think about, do you have enough money basically to have these different treatment arms, and they'll be big enough to say something statistical, right. Whether you're powered up to say anything. Mm-hmm. And then the unit of randomization?
Is basically household. We're working with a head of household.
Okay. And are you worried about any kind of spillover on other people? Like the type that I just described, where other people in the neighborhood might not get a job because you're doing that, or it's a big enough job market that you're not worried about?
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it. Yeah, I don't know. It's possible. We are working in a specific, geography, 3 contiguous neighborhoods in Rochester, New York. Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's something to consider.
We need to examine, yeah.
Yeah. So in that one, we have the unit of randomization does seem like the household level makes sense. And then are you going to have a sample frame to start off with, all the families that you're going to approach? Or are they going to be coming in somehow?
Yeah, they'll be kind of on the ground recruitment through various methods, working with neighborhood groups, community-based organizations. There's eligibility criteria that we've established, draft eligibility criteria. So people will advertise the program, people apply to the program, see if they meet the criteria. If they meet the criteria, then we randomize them into the groups.
Yeah. I mean, interesting thing there in terms of the interpretation, you'll find effects for people who apply to the program. If you force somebody into this program, you might get very different effects, which, maybe we never would want to force somebody into it. But as you expand the program to be wider and wider and try to get more and more people into it, might get different effects. So, yeah. That's just an interpretation issue. It's certainly within the group of people who are applying, you can see what the effect is for those type of people. Yeah. All right. So that's anybody else actually planning a study? Yeah.
I feel like I've talked about this a couple of times too, but our sort of project is to look at the drug abuse treatment centers in South Carolina, which offer counseling alone, add through telemedicine a module of physician intervention where medication-assisted therapy can be prescribed, and then compare, randomize that at the clinic level. Because we've sort of gone back and forth with individual versus sort of.
Yeah, I'm familiar with yours. So if everybody else is, we could jump into it.
Yeah. So and Right, so, and then give, sort of compare the two, the counseling along with just standard of care versus counseling.
Yeah, I think
Plus
that's a
intervention.
really interesting one to think about the unit of randomization. So there are two ways you could do the randomization. Do you guys, everybody up to speed on the program? So they have, these are for opioids.
Right, opioid dependence.
And then there'll be a treatment for them. How many do you think we should do that at the patient level and versus the clinic level? How many people think patient level? How many clinics are there?
30-something, 35.
35 clinics. And how many patients would be in each one, do you think? Something like times 100.
Yeah,
I think.
times maybe 150-ish probably.
How many people don't know, which is fine? How many people think that we should do it at the clinic level? And how many people do it at the patient level? All right. So why do you say the patient level?
Well, I said the clinic level.
I did.
Sorry, I was pointing to yeah.
Well, if it's opioid addiction, you're doing individual. I don't know. I don't know what spillover effects you have and how much the patients within an individual clinic are interacting with each other.
Yeah, but it seems somewhat believable that they're going to be relatively independent.
yeah.
Like in terms of they got treatment, they got medically assisted treatment. It's probably not going to spill over. That medically assisted treatment probably won't spill over to the other guys.
On the other hand,
But
they, if they're drug addicts or drug users, it's possible that other people within the clinic are their friends or something, or they know each other, and then it does spill over into like maybe they're talking about their treatment.
Yeah. So in that case, if that's the concern, this is the way that you actually think about how to do it. It's a real example. So if your concern is that the control group will learn that it's great and they're going to start on this same type of treatment, then what you'd want to be able to monitor in your data is what fraction of the treatment group gets the treatment, what fraction of the control group gets the treatment. And it won't be 0 for the control group because they can go get it somewhere else, or they can figure out their doctor can help them get it. The treatment group, hopefully like close to 100% will get it, but maybe not everybody would. And so you'd be monitoring that as part of your study. The treatment group is much more likely to get this treatment than the control, and then the treatment group got better outcomes or not. You'd want to think about how to rescale that, which is what Rachel will talk about. One of the things that I like about the patient level in this context is just the N. Like the number of people obviously is much higher than 30 versus, the worst case scenario is that at the clinic you'd only have 30 observations, whereas you'd have a lot more at the patient level. And if you had like 3 clinics, you just couldn't even do it really at the clinic level. But now that you're up to 30, you want to run the power calculation. So why do you want to do it at the clinic level?
So actually, our original proposal was at the individual level, and it was talking with providers in this space that were afraid that because this group of patients tends to participate in group sort of therapy activities, that it was that idea that they would sort of hear about medication-assisted therapy from other people in the group. If they were sort of in that together, and then could go access medication-assisted therapy from other sources that might not be immediately evident, so that they could essentially access the treatment, and we wouldn't have a way to sort of know that.
Oh, okay, so that's a monitoring, like just the data issue. They
Right.
can't see if they're getting it, which,
Right.
yeah, if that's the concern, then you
Can't
can't monitor it.
Right, and so we could monitor that but sort of that moves us from being able to measure everything with sort of administrative claims data to maybe having used sort of a survey. So it sort of makes some of the measurement aspect more complicated if we've got to go back and do some sort of fidelity analysis about whether or not there was some access to the intervention within the control group, I guess.
Yeah. And I don't know that all the details, but if there were a lot of Medicaid patients, for example, Medicaid paid for it, then if you could get Medicaid data, then you could actually go and see. Among our Medicaid patients, we've randomized some to get this. Some didn't, but they're in groups, so they might learn about it. Then you could start to monitor. But if you knew for sure that all the control group would get treated, who are friends with the treatment group, then now you are thinking about, just like we talked about, if you taught 2 kids how to do something and they teach the rest of the class, you're probably going to want to be randomizing at the class level. So if you really think that that's almost sure to happen, then you don't want to go down the path of the patient level randomization.
And I thought it was silly. Like, I thought this whole concept was nuts until I had 2 or 3 different psychiatrists sort of introduce this idea that this might actually be a problem. So now I think we're sort of rethinking. I mean, I would much rather do sort of an individual approach, but I think that's sort of been the thought process as far as that might actually be a sort of a real phenomenon.
Yeah, sometimes we do the pilots to see, is our hunch correct or not? So you do a pilot with 30 people in the treatment group and know who their group members are, and if they're sort of coming back a lot for group therapy, then you just like you survey them and see like, okay, now that these guys are on medically assisted help and telemedicine, are the other guys on medically assisted treatment as well. All right, so here's the question that I like to ask, which are what are the effects of foster care on child outcomes? So when children are suspected of being abused or neglected by their parents, that gets reported by, say, the school nurse or a doctor, and then there's an investigation that gets done by child protection caseworkers, essentially, and they will gather evidence, and then typically, if the child was really in danger, they could call the police and have the kid removed immediately. Typically, they will present evidence to a judge, a family court judge, who will determine whether the child can stay with their parents or have to be placed in foster care. So I think this is just a huge intervention. It's a very powerful intervention in kids' lives, take them away from their parents. And it's not clear to me where we should draw the line. If you look in data, this line changes a lot. So in Boston, we've had some scandals lately where the Child Protection Services knew about kids who were in trouble, but they didn't do anything. And the kids unfortunately died, and so now they were under a lot of scrutiny. Why didn't we do something about it? And the placement rate, now if you call up social services or child protective services and say that I suspect this kid's being abused or neglected, their placement rate basically doubled, or tripled immediately after, like doubled what it used to be. We're just taking a lot more kids now than we used to. And it's not clear to me that like if you were suspected of abuse or neglect 2 weeks after this scandal, that the level of abuse got much worse 2 weeks after the scandal than 2 weeks before, but the placement rate triples. It's probably a policy decision. We have to decide how aggressive do we want to be and how aggressive don't we want to be. If this plays out like every other scandal that's happened in every other state, like 4 years from now, our population is going to be 3 times as big, and people are going to say, why do we have so many kids in foster care? And now we're going to, we went too far, and we should be sending them, preventing that from happening. Okay, so I want to know what the effect is on kid outcomes. One would be safety outcomes, because that's the primary goal. And then the other ones would be, other measures of well-being, which I include test scores in school. Longer term, do they get in trouble with the police? Do they get better jobs? And so on. So anybody here have kids? Anyone have kids? Okay, so you're in my study, and I really want to know, this is an important question. You have to agree, it's an important societal question. So I'm going to randomize. If it comes up heads, I'm taking your kids away, and if it's tails, you're not, right? No one's going to want to be part of that study, right? You can't do it. So we have to think about other ways that we can actually get at this type of question without actually going ahead and taking kids away from their parents on a random basis. I didn't make this slide. Our colleague did, but I would definitely be in trouble if I did something like that. I like this article from the Times a few years ago. It says, to test housing programs, some are denied aid. Half of the test subjects, people who are behind on rent or in danger of being evicted, are being denied assistance from the program that basically gave people cash to pay their rent. They're being denied assistance from the program for 2 years with researchers tracking them to see if they end up homeless. Yeah, you don't want this on the front page of the New York Times if you're running a study, right? Where your outcome is homelessness. Even if just your outcome was like housed would be better than homelessness. Like we're gonna just see if you become homeless. Doesn't sound good. So we have Esther, who's the JPEL extraordinaire. Says randomized controlled trials are effective ways to find out what works and what doesn't. Every country has a limited budget and wants to find out what programs are effective. So one of the justifications for why you would want to do this randomization is a limited capacity to treat everybody. So a lot of people would be eligible for our program. We can only treat, like in my VA example, they can only treat 20 clinics, even though everybody might benefit from it. So you can only treat 20 clinics. Congress only gave us that much money. Then it might even be equitable to randomize who gets it and who doesn't. And then you're tracking to see if the attempted suicide rate goes down. Like we're waiting around to see who's attempting suicide. That would be bad on the front page of the New York Times, but we only have so much money, and we're going to roll it out. You might as well roll it out in a random way to see if it works. Another quote from the article says, the firm's Institutional Review Board concluded that the study was ethical for several reasons. It's not an entitlement, meaning that it's not available to everyone. There's not funding for everyone. it could not serve all the people who applied for it, and because the control group had access to other services that could help them as well. So they weren't doomed to being evicted if they didn't get into this program. So the two ways that I like to justify why this is the real world problem of trying to convince people to do a randomized controlled trial, and then we're going to be tracking outcomes, and it might sound unethical in the beginning, is there are two reasons. One would be clinical equipoise, we say, like we're not sure if this program works or not. Giving people cash might work in the short term, but maybe not for the long term if they're not using the money for paying rent, for example. So we're not sure if programs work. It's the classic. If you knew something worked, I don't know if you guys went over this example before, but the classic one is a parachute. So you're not sure if a parachute works to save your life, then you would have in the plane, you fly people up and then you say, okay, I'm going to randomly assign some people get parachutes, some don't, and then they throw them out of the plane. And then they see that the people with parachutes lived. And then they do a cross-randomization where the next time they go up, the people who were in treatment now are in the control group, and they throw them out of the plane and then like double check that the parachutes are the thing that saved them. Yeah, if you know something that works, then you're not going to do an RCT on it. But if you don't know, then that's typically a justification for not continuing to chase your tail and do lots of things and never sure what works and what doesn't. And the second one that would be typically good would be a capacity constraint, so that we can't treat everybody that we want to. So then we might as well do it in a rigorous way to see if it works or not. And if the capacity constraints aren't a problem, we'll talk about that. That gets into an easier world. But typically, we do have capacity constraints. All right, so what am I going to do with my foster care example? I've teamed up with the state of Illinois to, there's something called diversion. So if a kid comes into the foster care protective services, one idea is to just is to send them to a relative, but don't put them in formal foster care. It's a controversial idea actually, because if you go into formal foster care, there are a bunch of services that go with that, but it's really hard to go home. Like there's a lot of red tape to go home. Whereas if you sort of go into informally with a relative, then obviously you can go home much faster. You know, there's no red tape. So what we're doing is we're randomizing the caseworkers in their software. They can choose which programs they're going to do. Like there are a bunch of family preservation programs, place them in, recommend placement for foster care. Some of these caseworkers are going to have a new checkbox that they could choose, which is this diversion program. And other caseworkers, this is at the case level. Other cases that come in, they're not going to be able to check that box. They're not going to be able to put them in diversion. So the kids are going to be randomized into this opportunity to go into this new experimental program that may or may not work for them, and that it's not clear whether it's good or bad. And so we want to test it in a rigorous way. And so the IRB there said we could do that. We're not taking kids away from their parents, but once they're already deemed to be in need of child protective services, we're offering a different style of it. So sometimes it's difficult logistically or politically for service providers to provide care to some and not others. So you have a treatment group that you've set up as your study, and then a comparison group. The service providers have trouble distinguishing between treatment and comparison or customizing the service. So here's a case where you're telling a job training person to do something extra for the treatment group, but they could easily do that something extra for the control group too, and then the control group person comes in and they want to help them. And it's going to be really hard for them to say, don't help this person in this particular way. So the problem is that you get this contamination where the caseworker's only supposed to be treating the reds, but they end up treating a green as well, some of the greens. And so then that's a kind of a mess. You have to monitor that. The treatment and control groups now will be contaminated. So another way that you could, these are called crossovers. People in the control group who get the intervention when they weren't supposed to. So one idea would be the people come in and they're randomized to a certain caseworker, and that caseworker has been trained to help in a certain way, and other people are sent to a different caseworker who they haven't been trained to add that extra benefit. And then this person doesn't have to decide like, oh, I'm not supposed to be treating you in this way. I'm supposed to be treating other people. In this caseworker, they both get to basically treat everybody the same, but you're randomizing who they go to. That would be one way to do it. A very similar one would be you could randomize at the caseworker level, and then they get trained or don't get trained in how to do it. It's basically the same type of thing. It's just now I'm just choosing the caseworkers as my treatment and comparison group, and clustering that way as opposed to this sort of more spot randomization where I'm sending people to one versus the other. So this is like a typical, like you would have this concern. I don't want to have my doctors treating some patients in one way and some patients in another way for the same thing. So I'm not going to make them do that. I'm going to actually let them treat everybody the same, but then I'm going to randomize what they have an opportunity to do. Different doctors will have different opportunities of things to do as opposed to at the patient level. So now they don't have to worry about treating different people different ways. Another challenge would be that the control group finds out about the treatment. So if the treatment and control individuals know each other, this is exactly what we were talking about with the medically assisted treatment. So we have a treatment group and a comparison group, and then they talk to each other. If you did deny the control group, like the extra recess time, for example, then they would get mad, basically. So you would lose support in the community. People would think, well, what are these researchers doing? This is crazy. My kids should get recess too. Or the guys with the medically assisted treatment would say, well, I deserve that as well. And then you could get attrition. So these people it's going to be hard to monitor them later in your data. That would be a research reason not to do it as opposed to just a political reason. Yeah, Dave.
So this is something that my group is talking about with
Okay.
Our intervention with CCTs to gang members to go to school. So if this does happen, I guess like how do you find the right scale to say, okay, it's like we need to throw this idea out the window? Because I mean, this could possibly happen in our intervention.
Yeah, I mean, so from a research perspective, like the concerns, like if the control group there, this one was just attrition, like you can't follow them anymore because they like quit school.
Yeah.
That would be bad. Another thing would be that your treatment is like, whenever I see the picture of the guy with the lottery number and he's like opening some people win the lottery, they might get extra, like they're happy that they won the lottery. That could affect their outcomes. Other people are disappointed they lost the lottery. So here, some people learn that other people are getting cash. Why don't I get it? It might just be this negative, nothing's working for me in my life. I'm always unlucky. I never win anything. That had its own effect on people. Now you're studying this weird randomization. You're not studying the program itself. So that's something that, like, how big of a concern is that? It depends on how big of a deal is that they lost the lottery versus won the lottery. If you're approaching people separately, we have some solutions to this. So, well, it's a similar one would be if the control group benefited from the treatment. So if you give some cash to some people in the treatment group, and then the treatment group, they're pooling their resources in some way, that would obviously be another concern in the conditional cash transfer. We might not worry about them sharing so much, but in other contexts, like if you give people money from one part of a family, their extended family could easily benefit from that. And then the third, and I'm going to get to your answer, but the solutions sort of apply to all of these. So the control group benefits from the treatment. We may change their behavior after seeing the treatment. So this is there's a lot of interest at JPEL about clean water, and clean water is relates to sanitation. So if you gave some people better access to better sanitation, the treatment group may like that, and the control group may see that, and then they end up both getting it. This is your concern too, that the control group's going to go out and get this medically assisted treatment. And then the hourglass, or the temperature here, is they're both sort of in poor health in the beginning. If you gave people access to better sanitation, their health would improve a lot, but not for this group. But if they both get it, then their health's going to be the same. So the true impact of better sanitation is big, but if you do the treatment and comparison, control comparison later on, you're going to find that they're both healthy, and there's no effect of giving people the sanitation because of being in the treatment group, because the control group was treated as well. And then the control group benefits from treatment. The treatment group is harmed by the control. So here we have the example where it's a contagious issue. So as long as some people in your village are still not having access to adequate sanitation, they're contaminating the water supply, everybody's drinking the same water, it doesn't matter if you give some people access to sanitation, some not. Now this one, if everyone had the sanitation, it would improve things, but you didn't treat everyone, so it doesn't. This is a bit more nuanced. This just tells me my program of only giving some people the treatment didn't work, which at the end of the day, it didn't work. You had to treat everyone. But you may wrongly conclude that you shouldn't roll this out even farther. You're saying this thing never works, whereas if you did treat everyone, it would have worked. So you had to think through that issue. And here's the job training one, where without the experiment, we had jobs, some people getting jobs, some people aren't, but they're limited. And then we have an experiment where the people who were treated get the job. In a global sense, we're really not better off. We're just changing who's winning and who's losing. So we do learn the job training does help you get the limited jobs, but we're actually harming the control group when we gave out the job training. So what are some of the solutions? We can get to some of like the conditional cash transfer or even the medically assisted treatment. You could vary the unit to contain the spillover. So if you had different neighborhoods with different gangs in the different neighborhoods, you might want to have a treatment in comparison groups that are at the vary the unit to now you're going to be at the neighborhood level where the groups of friends are being treated. And this goes to you think people are being treated in the same clinic are the friends of each other. That's why you want to go up a higher level to the clinic level. The other one would be to try to create some kind of buffer. So if you had a social network or even neighborhoods, you could have this neighborhood being treated and this one's not. You want to make sure that they're spaced out in the city. So you could either randomize this one. The reason why this is different is because if you didn't have enough money to treat the entire neighborhood, you could treat some people in this neighborhood, and then you make sure that I guess the point here is that you're just treating a few people, and so that the other people aren't going to feel upset that they didn't win the lottery. Most people didn't win the lottery. It's not like 80% of people got it and 20% of people didn't. And then, so if you just pick out a handful of people from around the country that you're treating, you avoid some of this comparison problem where some people did get lucky, but most people didn't. So it doesn't cause a direct negative impact on the control group that they didn't get treated. So in terms of the conditional cash transfer program, you have like resource constraints probably, and you have.
At the N is the constraint, I think. So we talked about going to the neighborhood level, but gangs in Boston are so small, and it's a small city, as you know, that it's probably going to be really difficult to do at the neighborhood level. So individual is more realistic, and resource constraints as well. Like we just can't serve as many as we would like to.
Yeah, I mean there are a host of issues that I'm not an expert on. It's just interesting to talk about. But if you had, how big are the gangs?
Anywhere from like 4 to 20 people.
Yeah, so if you had like a 7-member gang and you treated 4 of them, and they actually like stopped being in the gang, like they're at school all the time now, that could just affect the gang in general, right? So that the people who didn't get it, they're probably more likely, their gang's dissolving. So either they're going to have to find a different gang, or maybe they're going to be positively impacted by treating only part of your sample. It gets into the spillovers. Are really interesting to think about there. Yeah, I don't know. In child welfare, I like to think about that hot spotting technique where we're trying to figure out who are the most expensive patients and lavish them with help. We could do a similar thing at the child welfare level where we try to predict who's going to have juvenile justice issues, who's going to be ripe for, which families are going to be ripe for foster care in the future, and then sort of give them a lot of services. Like it's focusing them the services where they probably most need it. And there I'm less worried about like the other families learning that this family got help. But I could see in the friends, this is like a longer recess. It's almost exactly the same as a longer recess. You're only giving it to some people. So definitely logistical issues. All right, so what if you have resources to treat everyone? So in my VA example, what if they had enough money to treat every clinic with their tool and their program? Then there's really not going to be a control group. And then how do I convince them? Well, it's important to study this, but there's no real reason why, no resource reason why you can't treat everyone. So the example here is, what if we could give laptops to every kid in every school in our district? We have the resources to do that. Well, one idea that might be politically feasible here is to phase it in. And oftentimes, a lot of things you do want to phase in just to see how well it's working. And then for the VA example, you might want to only have some clinics start out with it to see how well it's working and then roll it out based on their experience. So in the way that you would do this, in phase 0, nobody's treated. Yeah, I'm going to skip that. So in phase 1, a quarter of these guys are going to get treated. And 3/4 are going to be controlled. That could be for 3 months. That could be for 6 months. It depends on what kind of outcomes that you want to be able to measure. How much time do you have politically? And then the phase 2, you're going to have be half our treatment and control. Phase 3 and phase 4. By phase 4, everyone's in the treatment group, and you can't. Basically your trial's over. So there are obviously limitations here. If you wanted to look at 5-year impacts, you're not going to have a control group that hasn't been treated for those 5 years. You're going to have a control group that was treated like a year after everyone else. And then that's going to be a very different type of comparison than having a true control group that didn't get treated.
Is there a minimum time frame that you want for that control to be able to look at, or in these phase-ins, or I guess it depends on what?
Yeah, if you want something if you think something will impact outcomes very quickly, you can pretty much phase in relatively quickly to just see what the impact on that. If you wanted to look at 1-year outcomes, it would be nice to have a control group that's not treated for the year and another one that was treated right in the beginning and that has effects that accumulate over the time, so that by end of 1 year you could look at the hospitalization rate over the year for the treatment group versus the control that's actually out for the year. But if you wanted to look at 5-day readmission rates, then you could pretty much you could phase in much more quickly. Yeah. Okay, so and then in the phase-in, it could be any level, it could be any number of phases. Usually when I do my power calculations, I get historical data, and I simulate in the data, what if we did it with a 3-month lag in terms of the phase-in. So by the end of, let's say by the end of 18 months, everybody's going to be treated now. And so you could play with those parameters and see how much of your power is going to be impacted by the slower you go or the faster you go. And then you take that evidence to the partner and say, hey, if you could just wait 6 months, then we could have a lot more power than if you roll this out every 3 months. So in phase 1, half could get treatment and half could get the control, and then phase 2, everyone's treated. So again, I like to sort of evangelize the idea of a lot of programs are rolled out. So if it's not that hard to convince somebody we should roll out the program, okay, and then the next step is to convince them they'll do that in a random way, and in that way you could have an instantly credible comparison between a treatment and a control group that you can actually see if the program works, at least for short-run outcomes, than if you didn't do it at all. So this program in New Jersey with Jeff Brenner, they were sort of doing it quote-unquote ad hoc. If they had extra capacity that day, they might enroll a few more people into their program. And it might be a lot of my other research is in quasi-random assignments, so it's as good as random that the day that they had extra capacity, you happen to be the guy that came in the hospital that day. But it's not a true random assignment, and the nice thing about true random assignment is that it's instantly credible that the treatment and control group are very similar. If you do the quasi-random assignment, where it just happens to be in the data that the day that they had extra capacity, I was the guy who came in, you might still worry that with the days that they have extra capacity are in the summer, as opposed to the winter, and the people coming in the summer are different than the winter. That's just one example that you might control for, but there are lots of other ways that can sneak in and contaminate the quasi-random assignments. Whereas the randomized controlled trial, that's the controlled part, is that you're imposing your will on the data where you know that the treatment group is very similar to the control group, not only in the things you observe, but the things that you don't observe as well. All right, so sometimes there's eligibility criteria. So oftentimes we're going to treat people who have a low income or scored low on a poverty score. And so we have this distribution of people at different income levels. And then we're going to have a cutoff. And the people who are eligible for the program are low income, and those who are ineligible have higher income. So in this example, it's like the law says everybody below this income is eligible for the program and everybody above it is not. So where are we going to randomize? We can't randomize people over here very well. So if you had extra resources, though, you could have a new cutoff and what we call randomizing in the bubble. So this is when something is a program that people like, and then you start telling people we're going to randomize. Some people are going to be in, some people are going to be out. That could create political problems. Like, no, we like this. We like parachutes. We're not going to stop people from having. We like our program that gives housing assistance to people. So how are you going to randomize people out of it and then wait to see if they become homeless? It's just not going to work. Well, one thing you could do is expand the programs, and you could expand it in a random way. So you say, yeah, I like the program too. What if we raised funds to make it bigger? And then based on, and we could see here whether the people who set that cutoff got it right or not. If you change the cutoff and among the people just outside of your eligibility group, we're randomizing them. If the people who randomize into the program get much better outcomes, they should probably change that cutoff. If they find that there's no difference between these two, then it doesn't say the program doesn't work. It might work really well for people down here. But you might actually start seeing whether you should experiment with whether the cutoff should be lower. Because we know what doesn't work for people just above your threshold is probably less likely to work down here, and you could convince them to start studying should that cutoff be drawn. Yeah, the VA attempted suicide prediction tool. What they're going to do when they randomize a clinic in, they're going to target the top 1% or 5%. We're in the design phase now of who should be treated. But they have predictive analytics is all the rage now. So everybody's going to have scores for different programs of whether they would benefit from it. Then you're going to treat the people who you expect to benefit. And where do you draw that cutoff is not obvious. One idea would be to randomize some clinics. You're going to do it at 1%, some are going to be at 5%, and then you could factor that into your analysis. Another one would be they just told us for the 0.01%, the people at the top of the scale, they want to treat everybody there because they have really high attempted suicide rates. And so what we're going to do when we go in is we're going to relax the criteria from 5% to 0.01%. We're going to be relaxing that eligibility cutoff, and we're going to be randomizing within that bubble and seeing whether we should be treating people below the 0.01%. Yeah. So that, technically that dampens our power to find effects if you expect that these programs will work most effectively for the top 0.01%. But again, politically, they want to start treating those people. I'm not going to stop them from treating them, but they don't know whether it works, and they don't have enough money to treat everybody in the 5% range. So we're going to be relaxing the constraint on some clinics and not others, and then testing whether that works or not.
In this case, who created that predictor?
In the VAs?
Yeah.
Well, the VA did, and a lot of healthcare organizations, whether it's through consultants or the in-house stats people, are creating analytics to see who's going to be costly in the future. That's classic. And then the question is, once you have that flag, it's a high readmission risk person, then what do you do about it? So there are so many companies. I'm sure if you threw a rock toward Kendall Square, you would hit 4 companies that are doing this. The question is whether once you assign the risk probability to people, do you have anything to help them? And with the suicide prevention, there are some treatments that we think work, or in the medically assisted treatment, we think that works. And so if you could get people, encourage them to do that, then the tool can be effective. The tool is scarily predictive. It's and then I haven't been given. I don't have the tool yet. We just started talking about this a month ago, but I'd love to know what are the predictors of it. Is it the battle experience? Is it their geography? Is it their age? What are the things that are kicking off? Would just be interesting to know. Yeah.
I guess in that situation, we're thinking about a similar thing in Providence about high-risk youth who might be at risk of entering the juvenile justice system, and figuring out some predictive analytics to tell us that. But I think that one of the challenges we've had is thinking about then, if we're putting them into some sort of programming, mentorship, after-school programming, whatever we decide the intervention is, how do you tell them that they've been chosen for this? You're the one at risk for entering the juvenile justice system, and in this situation, I'm wondering how they talk to those veterans about being part of this type of program?
Well, there are, so there were two groups. One have some mental health treatment going on already, and some are just everyone. They've decided in this study to just treat the people who are already engaged with their mental health services. And so they're just going to be getting contacted by their mental health services that they're already sort of being treated by in a more intensive way. I don't think they're ever going to be told, like, IBM says you're in trouble. They're just going to start treating them more intensively. In the development context, I think there are some CCT programs that they have a poverty score essentially, and they're not telling people that you're eligible for. I don't think they're telling people why they're eligible. They just say, congratulations, you're eligible. Yeah, so the VA, they're not telling people why they're getting these extra messages. They're just going to get them. Yeah, I almost wonder for those, like the family members might want to know, like, hey, we're really worried about your family member. And they have that information, but I don't think they're going to be sharing. Yeah, but it's like an interesting question of whether you want to let them know or not. You don't want to push them over the, push them over the edge. So, but I love that idea of targeting the youth, and so I'd love to talk about it more. Everyone. Did they have another hand?
Yeah, I had a question more about the study. So are they targeting the folks who are in treatment because it's more natural to then be reaching out to them and doing these calls without having to tell them? Or are they more likely to be the people that are at higher risk?
They're more likely to be the ones at higher
They are
risk.
at higher risk.
But there are probably some that are outside of this that are still scoring high on the tool. And so I was originally in favor of just let's do everybody who's coming up high on your tool. But I think it's because of the funding constraints that they're going to start with their mental health population and then maybe roll it out wider than that.
Because I wonder if the people that aren't engaged in
They might
services
need it more.
be the higher risk people.
Well, it's the ones who are engaged at a high risk. But for the few people that aren't engaged and they're at high risk, they might need the services even more than the ones that are already being treated somewhat. So, there was definitely back and forth on that. And in the end of the day, it was a budgetary decision to just start with the mental health population. Yeah. All right, then SNAP. Here's a case where people are statutorily eligible for SNAP, so you can't randomize them out of SNAP. But one thing we could do in JPEL is working to encourage people who are eligible for the program to help them sign up for it. All right, so people in the control group, they could sign up for it. They're eligible for it. The people in the treatment group are getting people going and encouraging them to go into it. And then we're monitoring. It's not my study, but my colleagues are monitoring whether they do go into SNAP or not. So some of these people will, and a lot of them, hopefully if the encouragement design is effective, then more people will in that group. And then you could look at their nutrition and obesity and all kinds of things that come out of what are the effects of SNAP on outcomes. So here is just that a quarter of these guys are going to take it up. 3/4 of the group of that group are going to take it up. And then we're going to have to, in the analysis, I wanted to ask you guys, to evaluate the effect of the program, would you compare those who were enrolled to those who didn't, right? So a quarter of these guys did enroll and 3/4 of these guys did. You could do that comparison, the enroll versus not. You could drop those who didn't enroll from the treatment group because you were really aiming for them and they didn't go in. You could drop those who did enroll from the control group. So these guys, just take the people who didn't take up. And then D, you could do both B and C, so drop people who are outside of what you wanted them to do. And then E would be compare the treatment and control, like the whole treatment to the whole control group. This is our last clicker of the day, I think, for me. Okay, yeah, so 2/3 say you should do both. Like these are the opposite extremes. So some people say you should compare the whole treatment and the whole control group, and some people say you should drop the people that did what you didn't want them to do. So who said E? Who said E? Yeah, so why don't you want to go with the dropping people and keeping everybody in?
I think there could be sort of unobserved reasons that people didn't take it up in both groups that could be impacting the results.
Yeah, it's not random who's not taking it up, right? Those are people who are choosing not to. So the people, the quarter here that don't take it up, even though they were told, like, we will fill out the forms for you, we will get it for you, just all you have to do is sign here. The fact that they said, no, I don't want it, they could be very different than the people who say, okay, I'll take that very easy process. And so their outcomes could be just very different, and it's not random anymore. You're cherry picking, essentially, when you do that. And it's going to make it look like the program is even better than it is because you're not providing it to people who may not benefit from it. And so that's in that non-random way. If you compare the entire treatment group versus the entire control group, let's say obesity here is like 5% less than here, then what you do is you get to estimate the effect of the encouragement. So for sure, like, there's no controversy here. You could definitely, if we roll out an encouragement, help people sign up for food stamps, then that will improve people's lives. Even though you know that people who weren't encouraged could still sign up, and people who you do encourage might not sign up. In general, if we roll out a program that encourages people to sign up for food stamps, it's going to improve their lives compared to not rolling out that program. Literally, the randomization is you're testing the effect of encouragement. And then if you wanted to test the effect of food stamps itself, then you could do some more statistics to back it out. Basically, you would say if there is a difference in obesity due to food stamps, it's because 3/4 of these guys got it and 1/4 of those guys got it. So you're going to rescale the estimate based on the difference of the take-up of the two groups. And that's something Rachel will talk about later. So we're going to compare both the entire. You're going to compare the entire treatment group to the entire control group. That's called an intent to treat analysis. Like, we intend to treat you, and then we can see what the effect of is intending to treat you. That's the applied statistics term for it. It's an intent to treat. And then if the sample size is small, like we only have a couple schools to treat, then we might just have to rethink what we're doing and either change the unit of randomization to a smaller level, if that makes any sense. You could do it at the classroom level or the individual level. In terms of stratification, I talked about this already. So if you wanted to stratify by school, some schools have more treatment than others. Yeah, so there could be power reasons why you'd want to stratify. Some schools you want to make sure that are in the, you're going to have more treatment guys from that school and more control groups, more controls from other schools based on the mean and standard deviation of the outcomes that vary across the schools. So that gets a little bit more technical. What do I want you to take away from today? Just to recap, if the challenges of the service provider can't distinguish between treatment and control, it'd be unusual to ask a doctor or a caseworker to treat some people differently than others, and you're worried about these crossovers that the control group's going to get treated, then you should change the unit of randomization to basically the caseworker or the doctor level. If the control group finds out and either benefits or is harmed by it, so we're worried about these spillovers, you can again change the unit of randomization to broader level and create a buffer as another solution where you're only treating some people and then making sure that there's space between those that you're treating and not treating. If you have resources to treat everybody, then you could phase it in. That's politically one way that you could get people to buy in. If you had strict eligibility criteria, you could randomize on the bubble, so expand the program. So any program that people love, they say, we can't randomize it, we love it. Well, what about expanding the program then and randomizing on the expansion? If the program's an entitlement, you could do an encouragement design that just encourages them to sign up for it. And if the sample size is too small, that's basically a major problem in most studies. It's a concern. And so if you could change the unit of randomization or stratify in a way that amplifies your power by treating more in one group versus another based on their means and standard deviation, that gets a little technical. That's another way you can pump up your power. All right. My name is Joe Doyle. If you had any questions, you could just Google me and ask me questions. I don't want to just abandon you, but it's 2:30 now, and I don't want to hold you over. So thanks so much for the good conversation. I appreciate it.